Ladies and gentlemen, Dentsu International APEC Data and Text expert, Mr. Abhinay Basin, will walk you through new avenues of driving holistic audience understanding for brands and how it has had an impact on client engagements in the region. So please join me in welcoming our next speaker, Mr. Abhinay Basin, Vice President, Data and Product Solutions Asia Pacific, Data Sciences of Dentsu International, and let's find out right now.
Hello, and thank you for having me at today's session of MMA. I am Abhinay Basin, and I'm excited to talk to you about driving connected intelligence. Let me just share my screen so that all of you guys can see it. I think it should be visible right now. Okay, great. So a quick introduction to me. I am the Vice President of Dentsu's Data Sciences Division at APAC, and a core of what I do is build products in AdTech and MarTech to drive value for our clients, as well as provide unique proprietary solutions for Dentsu globally. I think the context of connected intelligence is super important in the world in which we're in today, more so because with a lot of ecosystem changes, with a lot of changing in content consumption, and I'm going to go through that during the course of this presentation, I think it's imperative for us to not be in a sentiment of all is lost with the death of cookies, with lesser information being available to us, but really look at how we can maximize the entire ecosystem. And before diving a lot into what the ecosystem looks like today, I thought it would be great to spend maybe a few minutes just on like this one fundamental side to remind us of what we do and why we do our daily lives. And I think the key crucial element in that is, if you look at what marketeers have been doing forever and what we continue to do as either whether we're on an agency side or a client side or whatever that side is that we're ultimately trying to change the way people who receive communication either identify with a brand or a product or want it more highly or ideally both. Ultimate aim, of course, is to drive more brand value and to drive consideration for a particular offering. And just to put things into context, just last year itself being a COVID year, the size of the advertising economy is still astounding. It's about $650 billion. That's $650 billion spent by brands to try to identify who their right audiences are, to send messaging to them in the most relevant time period for them to actually derive value into either considering a brand more or actually making a purchase. Now, if we look at the way COVID has actually shaped us, and I think a lot of this is a no-brainer. One is our content consumption has actually changed rapidly, right? And I think if I have to look at my own behavior, I definitely see myself spending a lot more time on the screen or on several screens actually during the day. And if we actually look at, and I think this is one of the first reports that I had read on some sort of analysis of what's actually going on in terms of the changing consumer behavior, was this one report by Nielsen that actually spoke a lot about how, and again, as a no-brainer, people are spending a lot more time virtually. In the US alone, that time spent from March of the previous year to March of 2020 was actually a 215% growth. Similar stats across APAC, across several large geographies of the world. So the way audiences started consuming content grew exponentially and rapidly. And the other interesting trait is subscription, or the will to even purchase either content through video, content through news, or whatever it is, just increased dramatically as well. What the chart out here is sort of representing is it did like an analysis of audiences by demographic according to the ages, picked up like the top subscription platforms of the world, and then sort of identified who is actually willing to purchase or has made a purchase on subscribing to one or more of these products. And what interestingly is a trait that you can see, and again reflecting maybe on my own habits, is that younger audiences tend to actually have a deeper expression for a willingness to actually purchase a subscription to an OTT platform or a content platform that they are engaged with, compared to older audiences. And the variety of platforms, I think, has really been tremendous from that point of view. And we talk about content consumption on this slide, but even when you look at like purchase of, let's say, products and services today, like your daily essentials, a lot of that in large parts of the world are now e-commerce driven, right? So you've had like a boom of e-commerce that has been more propelled by COVID-19, and just the amount of information that we actually give online and subscribe to online has gone completely through the roof, thanks to the lockdown of COVID-19 as well. And what that really takes me back to one of the cores of why we're discussing this topic of connected intelligence today, is that the reality of the ecosystem in which we live in today is fragmented. We are actually, like I said, on a lot more platforms than we think they are. Earlier, if you saw the ecosystem, you'd probably see walled gardens as Facebook or Google as very large dominant players, and that Amazon has now come up and joined the ranks out there. And there has been a mushrooming of a lot more players who are now coming up as mini and new age walled gardens, be it in the retail space. I've used some local examples from India and APAC, where you talk about players like Grofers, like Flipkart, who are e-commerce platforms that are becoming their own walled gardens in that space. If you look at content consumption, you can see Disney Plus, you can see Hulu, you can see HBO, you can see Amazon, you can see a lot of those players creating or striving to get a lot more audience attention in that space, which actually means that they're becoming walled gardens in themselves. And a lot of them are actually not open for advertisement from that sense, right? And then, of course, systemically, you had like your third-party players of your Lotame, your Zeotabs, your Experience of the world, that just looked at the rest of the open web and created a lot of audience intelligence. But fundamentally, what that's really created is that you now suddenly have a lot of logins, a lot of information that all these platforms are garnering about you, but are in their own siloed ecosystems from that point of view. You also now, by the way, have devices that are actually playing a role in being mini walled gardens in themselves. Apple's ATT restrictions have actually, in many ways, just focused on keeping all the audience information on their platform, which is nothing but your handheld by itself, right? And not just the fact that our audience consumption habits and our own consumption habits changed during lockdown, but there were also systemic changes that got prompted in the ecosystem. Google, I think, was the first to announce and maybe shock the entire world in which we're in about the deprecation of third-party cookies. Apple followed suit, also did actually in parallel talk about ATT protocols that you see in their privacy and compliant changes that they actually made. And browsers like Firefox and I think there already been other platforms as well that actually said that we're going to stop sharing information externally beyond our own platform. So you can see that the ecosystem has also changed along with the change in our consumer habits. And what essentially that then did to sort of compound the effect is have a ripple effect on the rest of the open web and the advertising ecosystem. You had a lot of partners like Trade Desk, like Tritio, Facebook included, that had challenges in the sense of the information that you could actually get from their platforms, and how relevant each of these audience-led platforms would be now for advertisers to get more insights, as well as brand marketers and planners to plan better for audiences. So you had a compounding effect of ecosystem and behavioral changes that actually resulted in a fragmented customer view. from that sense, right? You had only certain pieces of information available in certain pockets, and often the way the holy grail of marketing was in terms of how everything could be stitched in some sense could actually not happen any longer. And what that really did do is in many ways create a sentiment that everything is lost. I think there have been, all of us have been actually inundated with enough articles that talk about deprecation of third-party cookies being the end of the world, systemic ecosystem changes that I spoke about in terms of Apple, in terms of Firefox, and the rest of it. We then realize that maybe the data sets that we have are actually not so valuable any longer, because either you couldn't get back a lot of intelligence, or some of them were dated, or systemic ecosystem changes would prevent them from being utilized further. So you then had a threat of, or you still do have a threat of fragmented audiences. You had newer walled gardens emerge. I spoke about some examples in OTT. Or over the top content. I spoke in terms of how there have been e-commerce platforms that come up as new walled gardens. Direct to consumers is another category of brands that is actually shaking up a lot of advertisers, because in that way they are also becoming all inclusive in terms of the information that they have, right? So it could be a very doomsday scenario, and I think that's been a typical approach. However, when I look at it personally, I feel that we're in a golden era of marketing and advertising. And I think that's because of just being in an era of connected intelligence. And what I mean by connected intelligence is the fact that while we may look at the mushrooming of several newer walled gardens that are emerging to be, let's say, silos in their sense, I actually feel that we don't have to look at things so traditionally in the form of, let's say, identifying individuals at every single level. We should look at the fundamental of what we wanted to do as marketers, which is to understand the audience holistically, and to be able to extract more value from the various platforms that exist. And what really drives connected intelligence, and which will only keep propelling as technologies like 5G, IoT continue to be proliferated and scaled throughout the ecosystem. I feel the two fundamental drivers of this is the sheer volume of data that's going to be available, and the second being the ability to understand and make sense of it, and really use automation to process that data at scale and derive more value. Speaking about the sheer volume of data, I think everyone on this call would have probably seen charts like this over the years of what happens in an internet minute. There are tons of data providers that are actually going to be available. Of course, we do look at some of them as walled gardens, but fundamentally, if you think of what it is that we're going to try to do, is that we're going to try to look at how we're going to understand cohorts of audiences, or identify similar traits of audiences and stitch them together. And I'm going to talk about that in just a few minutes. The second thing that I feel, like I said, is going to drive the era of connected intelligence is going to be the sheer ability and technology available to process data at scale and make sense of a lot of that information. And if you just look at the stats of today, right, you're seeing services now being offered in terms of understanding data and processing that in the cloud. A lot of companies have actually mushroomed in that area as well. Just looking at a stat from the US market, and similar traits are actually happening in APAC, because a lot of that tech talent is actually driven in this part of the world, is the fact that cloud compute itself is growing at a CAGR of 20%. And it's likely to have exceeded 160 billion in terms of value of that part of the economy, with a lot new players mushrooming. And what that's really enabled people to do, and advertisers more specifically, is to focus on getting maximum value of their data, which could either be through partnerships, through data clean rooms, by creating and getting more insights from their own data through CDPs, by trying to get cohort-based matches. Contextual is making a comeback. So the entire tech wherewithal is actually in many ways taken an overhaul to try to help brands and marketers understand their audiences a lot better. And if I have to just, as I come towards the close of this session, if I have to just look at some of the ways we can do it, and I've just taken a Dentsu example out here because it's some of the things that we've done. It's more about looking at, like I said, how we can understand audiences across the ecosystem, either through what the holy grail today seems to be like is at an individual level, or through a cohort level, or through which could be typically your partnerships that you actually bring to the entire table, or through contextual advertising that is really coming into the forefront of even strategies like Google is actually pitching through the federated learning of cohorts. They're looking at a contextual based way of understanding audiences. So fundamentally, while we might have actually thought that the entire ecosystem is crumbling, we feel that now it's actually given a lot more options for you to actually make sense of your data, right? So you could actually start with a first party data set, which could be something that you've created over the years or recently through a lot of your marketing campaigns. It's then about matching it to data clean rooms, and then pushing that out into the entire realm of walled gardens as well as the open web. And I feel that the entire fact that we now have a lot more sources of audience intelligence is the fact that we can actually now delve deeper into understanding an audience, not just from one sliver of their life, but from many slivers of their life, to actually complete our understanding of that audience at an overall level, not necessarily at an individual level. And just one example, as I close the call, from to actually show that all is sort of not yet lost. I think that what that enables us to do in terms of getting data from various levels, and technology that now lets us get into in the moment real-time marketing, more driven by mobile, more driven by the entire app economy, more driven by the web, and just the fact that handset penetration has also increased tremendously, is the fact that now brands can get not just irritating as pop-up ads that we all sort of hate, but make your interactions a lot more relevant. And I've picked up some examples of how NBA has done it, how Expedia actually does it, to really understand where the audience is from a context, figure it out in terms of what they're really looking for, give suggestions of a travel itinerary, and then have a very engaging, helpful conversation to guide that customer through their journey. With that, I'd actually like to thank you for your time on this session today. And I look forward to the rest of the series. I think there's a great lineup planned in MMA, and I hope you were able to gain a lot from this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Abhinay Basin, for your presentation. Ladies and gentlemen, and the next session is the report 2021, the current state of MarTech in Vietnam and what's next.